In this video, we'll take a look at adding a ATA-191 3PCC to WebEx Control Lab. One of the first things to be aware is we need to make sure we have the 3PCC version or the MPP version of the ATA-191. The enterprise version that typically is used with CUCM cannot be firmware migrated to MPP or 3PCC. So I'll repeat that one more time. The enterprise version of the ATA-191 cannot be migrated. In any case, if you see the part number I have is the ATA-191-3PW-K9. So that is the 3PCC version of this unit. And we're going to be adding it to WebEx Control Lab in a few moments here. So one of the other things to also be aware is the unit itself may have older firmware, and you want to definitely update the firmware to the latest version if it has old firmware. Right now we're looking at the back of the unit, so you'll see I have a POTS connection to phone line 1, just a standard plain old telephone. We'll look at it in a moment here once we deploy it. The cable with the blue tape on it is just RJ45 Ethernet cable to the network that obviously has internet access. Then we have a power connector on the right hand side. So fairly simple setup. Typically this may be used for like a facsimile deployment if you have an old fax machine or alarm system that needs POTS. So right now we're going into the WebEx Control Lab under devices. We're going to go ahead and add this device. And generally this type of device would be added to a workspace, because it's going to typically belong to an office. In this case, I'm going to just call it like a back office, but it would be used, you know, as I mentioned, potentially with a fax machine, or it can be used with an alarm system. There's still a lot of equipment out there that uses actually analog, plain POTS, plain old analog phone system. So this is the Cisco ATA-191. We're going to go ahead and put in the MAC address. You do want to be accurate with the MAC address. Typically, I recommend taking a picture of the MAC address or getting to the web GUI of the product and then capturing it so there's no typos. I'm going to remove the colons here, even though it looks like it will take it, but I'm just going to remove it just not to have any issues. I'm going to hit next here. And then I'm going to give this an extension here. Oh, okay, it looks like it does not like that. So let me go ahead and adjust that extension. And yeah, I'm not going to give it an actual PSTN number, but let me just go ahead and adjust that extension here. Okay, so it looks like it likes that. So we'll go ahead and save this here. So we're just going to call that extension 1910. Okay, it says workspace created, successful device successfully added, bottom right corner as you noticed. And then we're going to go to the WebEx Help Center regarding onboarding or adding this device within WebEx Control Lab. So we want to take a look at the instructions. Basically, there's going to be a specific provisioning URL that we need to add to the actual ATA-191 for it to be provisioned on WebEx Control Lab. So we'll take a look at here. Okay, so we're going to select the North America. So that's the Cisco SIPFlash.com. We're going to go ahead and copy that. And then we're going to go ahead and log into the ATA-191. Oh, okay. So did not like that. Let me try it again. I'm going to try admin. So let me do admin. Okay, so that worked just fine. And by the way, this was factory defaulted, this unit, before I started this. Okay, so we have the ATA-191-MPP, so it's a 3PCC version. Notice we have updated firmware, very critical. So if you're trying to deploy this and you're having issues, please update the firmware. The number one issue I see folks running into often with 3PCC phones when they're trying to deploy them is a often they're running very old firmware. So the solution is really easy. Just update the firmware to the latest firmware and or what's recommended in the documentation within the WebEx Control Center. Let me copy this link one more time just to make sure I have it in clipboard. And then we're going to go ahead and erase the profile rule that's by default in it. We're going to paste in the CiscoSIPFlash.com URL with HTTPS. We'll just take a quick look here to make sure there's nothing else. Okay, it looks like we're in pretty good shape. We'll go ahead and submit it. And one thing to be aware is when you're provisioning the ATAs with WebEx Control Lab, it does take a number of minutes, so it's not a very quick process. So I just hit submit there. And during the process, there'll be a phase, and I'll try to show it here, where it's really uncertain if you're making positive progress or not. So the best thing is just give it some time. Generally, I would say you're probably looking at 4 to 8 minutes. It can be even longer. It can be 10 minutes plus. But you definitely want to be patient with the unit. Eventually, what will happen is we'll lose actual web connectivity to the unit. So the web interface of the unit does get locked when it pulls down a config from WebEx Control Hub. So that would be one indicator that you're moving forward in a positive direction. So right now we still do have web connectivity to the ATA-191, but that if everything goes positive here, we will lose that eventually here in a few minutes. So we'll just kind of monitor how things are going. Then we'll go to the status side, and then let me take a look. I'm just going to check to make sure it so I'm going to check to check the status. Okay, so that's, if you notice, let me go back down. Provisioning status successful with the SIP Flash right there has an XML file that actually pulled down. So that's actually very good news. So even though it pulled down the XML file, the actual web interface of the unit has not locked as of yet. We can check the WebEx Control Lab, but generally it does take a number of minutes before it is reflected as far as like status online within WebEx Control Lab, and sometimes it may even take a longer period of time. So this part I'm not too surprised that it's showing status unavailable, but let's see when we lose actual connectivity, web access to the actual ATA-191. Because that'll kind of be an indicator that we're moving into the next phase of the provisioning. Okay, so it looks like we probably lost web access to the ATA-191, which is a good sign. So this means we're kind of progressing to the next phase of the provisioning. And again, we just have to be patient with this provisioning. It does take a number of minutes, and okay, yep, so we definitely lost access. So we'll take a look at a unit itself here at the lights that we're seeing, and so the unit is going through a reboot phase right now. The firmware actually on the unit itself I've updated recently, so it should be in parity with what WebEx Control Lab is using. But as I mentioned earlier, if you're having issues with your provisioning of the ATA, either 191 or ATA 192, again being the MPP version, that's critical. The enterprise version will not work, but being the MPP version, you definitely want, as a first troubleshooting step, or one of the first troubleshooting steps, you want to definitely bump it up to the latest firmware and or the firmware that is recommended by the documentation on WebEx Control Lab. The other thing also for troubleshooting is doing a factory reset, because what happens with some of the phones is if you're going through a situation where for whatever reason you're having issues provisioning a phone, the phone at some point of time may just stop attempting to actually handshake with WebEx Control Lab if it's not successful, either being old firmware or whatever might be the case. So if you're at a phase where you've spent a good amount of time, let's say 20 minutes or plus, and you're not seeing any forward progress, you probably want to go ahead and reset the phone to factory default, and then go ahead and do these steps again. Make sure the firmware is up to date. Go ahead and apply the actual provisioning rule like we did for the SIP Flash site, as you saw a few moments ago. To reset the ATA-191, 192 factory default is fairly easy. On the back side of the unit, there's a red reset hole. You do need to use a paper clip. And while the unit is powered on, I typically hold that down for about 15 seconds. And that's enough that causes the unit to go back to factory default. So that part's pretty easy. Okay, so we're going to go back here and take a look at the status in WebEx Control Lab. We're just going to refresh and see if the status has changed here. For the ATA-191, it has. If you notice, it's online now for back office 1 for the Cisco 191. Okay, great. We have our MAC address there. We have the actual IP address of the unit. Okay, and we have our extension 1910. So the next thing we can do is actually a test call here to make sure that we have dial tone, and also to make sure that we can actually receive a call. So I just called this from another phone, and then we're going to go ahead and pick it up and make sure we have dial tone. I can hear the dial tone.
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing.
Okay. I ended up shutting off one of my mics so I don't get a loop there, but hopefully you heard me speaking there. So kind of going back, wrapping this up, is the key thing is you want to make sure you have the MPP version, also known as 3PCC of the ATA-191. So that's the actual part number we're looking at right now, the ATA-191-3PW-K9. That would be item number 1. Item number 2, make sure you have updated firmware on the unit itself. Don't try to, use very old firmware, because that in itself will be a problem. And then also you probably want to do a factory reset. So those are kind of the 3 key items. In any case, hopefully this video has helped you.